Hi Year 11 and welcome to this quick revision video on Poppies by Jane Weir. Some of you have requested this one and it's a poem that's not come up for a couple of years and I think there's a lot of things that you can say about this one, so keep watching to find out more. So in a nutshell, what is this poem about? So this poem is quite a rarity when it comes to war poems in that it's told from the perspective of an often unheard and marginalised voice, which is that of the loved one left behind to kind of worry about and think about someone that they know and love going off to fight in conflict. In this poem specifically, it focuses on the maternal perspective, so that of a mother sending her son, her child off to war, and then struggling with the emotional impact of that. This poem is a poem of kind of dual imagery and dual layers, so that it really remembers, or has a mother remembering her child as an innocent schoolboy, getting him ready for school with his blazer and his kind of uniform, and comparing that, juxtaposing that with the more kind of like grown masculine figure that he now is as he goes off to fight in some unspecified conflict. Ultimately, in the poem, the mother has to accept that her son is leaving. She can't do anything to stop that. And instead, it focuses on kind of prioritising the love and care that she has for him. But the ending is ambiguous. You might read some interpretations where they very definitively say the son is dead or the son is alive. In my point of view, it's very much left open for our interpretation as a reader. And I think that deliberate uncertainty, that deliberate ambiguity, obviously reflects the experience of the mother and the fact that if you have someone that you love going off to fight in conflict, you are not going to know for certain for a lot of that time whether they are alive or dead. And I think Weir has crafted that very, very deliberately to create that sense of the unknown. So this poem is really symbol rich. I've got 4 key images on the board, on the PowerPoint here, which I really like to go into. Hopefully, if I just pause for a second, you might be able to look at them and name those for me. So obviously the most kind of key symbol here is that of the poppy itself, which is obviously, as we know, a symbol that is used for military conflict and very much serves as a universal symbol of remembrance, but also a reminder of vulnerability and maybe resilience. Like poppies are such a fragile but beautiful flower. There's a lot of historical context behind them, obviously, and when they first grew in Flanders Field in World War I. But there's that kind of, this is a poem that hasn't got a set time frame. It just starts off 3 days before Armistice Sunday, and poppies had already been placed on individual war graves. So we know that this poem was obviously set after World War I, but there is nothing else in it that gives us a sense of a date or time. And I think that's really important in, again, linking to that universality, that this is a poem that can relate to any conflict and therefore anybody who's going through the experience of having a loved one fighting in conflict. Second symbol that I think is really key here is that idea of the gelled blackthorns. So the metaphor of the child's hair. So when the mother says that she wishes that she could run her fingers through the gelled blackthorns of your hair. And it's obviously an image that shows how the idea of them being gelled blackthorns, that it's something that is kind of like military-esque, that there is in a certain style. So it's symbolic of how the army is kind of coming between the mother and her child. But more than that, there's also that deeper religious metaphor, connotations of sacrifice. If we think, this is very Englishy, but if we think about the idea of obviously thorns, Jesus wore a crown of thorns when he was crucified. So there's some ideas there about that sacrificial nature, maybe the son himself being a kind of a sacrifice to war, of war, and the relationship between him and his mother kind of being sacrificed due to that. There's now that physical barrier between them through the gelled blackthorns. Contrasting this, we've got that beautiful simile of the world overflowing like a treasure chest, which promises adventure and excitement, and it almost suggests what the military propaganda is intoxicating her son with. So that's the rest of the quotation: the world overflowing like a treasure chest and you away intoxicated. Again, linking to that idea almost similar in Kamikaze, with how the military and propaganda can kind of influence people in a way that means that they're acting not quite in their own kind of right mind, it almost suggests. And then finally, there's lots of birds imagery within this poem. So we get release the songbird from its cage, and then the image of the dove, which comes back twice. And that's a really powerful symbol. Both the birds that are mentioned are a powerful symbol of freedom, but also, again, that idea of vulnerability. Birds are quite kind of small, fragile animals, but the dove specifically itself can represent both peace and hope, but also, more sadly, it can connote to the idea of death as well. So keeping that sense of ambiguity at the end of the poem, where we're unclear of the ultimate fate of the sun. So, as always, if you're given the poem, there's a lot more that you should be able to say about form and structure, but even so, if you're just remembering it, there are still quite a few things that you can easily remember about this poem. So first of all, this is another one of our dramatic monologues. So just like My Last Duchess, for example, we have one speaker who's kind of speaking directly to an implied listener or an implied auditor. Both mean the same thing there, it just depends which word you prefer. And this creates a really personal, intimate tone. The use of direct address, you were away, for example, quite early on, creates a sense of closeness between us, as if we are almost the son himself listening to his mother and her kind of really personal individual worries. And that heightens the sense of loss as well that we feel from the mother, because it's as if she's directly addressing her son even though he's not there. In terms of structure, this is a poem that's written in free verse. It means that there's not any set kinds of rhyme scheme or pattern, and it uses irregular stanza structures alongside enjambment and caesura. The most kind of key bit of enjambment actually comes between the second and the third stanza. All my words flattened, rolled, turned into felt, slowly melting. So there's a sense of enjambment between the structures, allowing that sense of maybe like grief and loss to just build and amplify as the poem continues. And all of that together, the free verse, the irregular stanza structures, the enjambment, the caesura, creates a deliberately chaotic and uncontrolled nature to the poem. We could probably say that in a very Englishy way again, that this reflects the feelings of those left behind, the feelings of being out of control, of not having this set organisation because you're just worrying about that loved one who's away from you. So there's something really purposeful that you can say about the structure there. A little bit different on this PowerPoint today. So I've put up some key quotations here. There's a lot of really impactful quotations that we can analyse, and we know that analysing methods, zooming in on language, picking out one particular word or technique and really kind of picking it apart is something that we want to do more of to get those higher marks. So just picked up some quotations here that I think are really key ones. What you might notice about most of these is that they're linking to the idea of touch. So do remember that for that AO3, that context, Jane Weir also worked as a textile designer as well as being a poet, and so a lot of her poems are very focused on tactile language, so that idea of the sensory detail of touch. So sellotape bandaged around my hand, graze my nose across the tip of your nose, stomach, that idea of it being kind of like turning over, churning, all of this idea of kind of texture that we can feel without the reinforcements of scarf and gloves. We've got some sensory imagery of sound as well, hoping to hear your playground voice. So really think about how we can drill into these devices and pick these apart. And you can obviously pause the video here and have a go at analysing some of those, exploding some of those, and thinking about how you could link it to ideas about power, conflict, etc. And what you'll notice here as well is there's that real blend of domestic and military language. So the domestic language, the language of home, the language of kind of that maternal relationship, whereas the military language, the idea of the bandage, the graze, the reinforcements, never allowing us to forget that this relationship has been impacted by war. In terms of some key terms and comparison poems, this is a great poem to think about that key term enjambment, when we've got that sense of kind of movement between a sentence in the poem that runs over from one line to the next with no punctuation, creating that really kind of free-flowing impact. And also that idea of free verse, which I've already mentioned, creating that kind of open, maybe conversational, but also arguably maybe slightly less controlled overall kind of impact. Poems we could compare this to, there's lots of poems that you could compare this to. I think Kamikaze would be an amazing one for the effects of conflict on people, specifically kind of family, those left behind. It would have been brilliant for our last mock exam that we've just done. But also War Photographer and Remains, that idea, particularly for War Photographer, of a marginalised voice, someone who is experiencing trauma, even if they're not directly first-hand involved in kind of on the ground combat, if that makes sense. Obviously a war photographer is still in war and experiencing atrocities, but they are observing rather than being involved themselves. For the mother, obviously she is not in warfare, but she's just having to imagine, and in some ways that might even make it worse. And Remains might be another one, that idea of an individual experience of conflict. Contrastingly to Poppies, in Remains obviously you have got a soldier who's actively involved, whereas again in Poppies it's the idea of being left behind to think, to wonder. So those are just some of the poems that you could potentially link to if Poppies was to come up. And then finally, as always, we've got the knowledge organiser here by the wonderful Stuart Pryke. So this just goes through in a lot of detail particular things that you might want to take note of and add to your revision maps. As always, guys, hopefully this has been helpful for your revision and just giving you a quick recap. There are loads of other brilliant resources out there online, so please do check them out if you want some more detailed analysis, or feel free to talk to myself or your teachers at school. And as always, if you found this helpful, then please remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Take care. Bye.